President Biden's re-election campaign is establishing a working group dedicated to uprooting misinformation on social media. This is per The Hill. The cohort is comprised of a, quote, army of folks to push back on disinformation. And according to Politico, it's intended to correct false or wrong information about the president's record, COVID-19, and other topics.
This is a departure from previous strategies the White House employed that included relying on social media to be the gatekeepers of content deemed misinformation. Journalist Michael Shellenberger has reported extensively on the government's use of social media companies to censor citizens, and he's here to discuss this further. Michael, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you.
Michael, I want to just jump right into this and ask you this question. How extensive and exhaustive have these steps been by the U.S. government against its own citizens? Because a lot of people believe this goes a lot deeper and further back than what we're led to believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't even know at this point. I think what we've seen is the tip of the iceberg. As you know, during the Twitter files, we discovered extensive demands by the Department of Homeland Security, by the FBI, by the White House on Twitter executives to censor disfavored views, including accurate information. We saw the same thing with the Facebook files, where the White House was demanding that Facebook censor critics of the vaccine, also accurate information, even though Facebook executives themselves worried that doing so would actually increase vaccine hesitancy, because it turns out that if you want to make people comfortable with the vaccine, they need to be able to talk about it. But they did so because they felt pressure that they would not get support from the White House to support a $2.3 billion European business that they needed the White House's help to secure. And so what we've seen repeatedly, and this was all laid out in the lawsuit by the attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana against the Biden White House, extensive government demands for censorship that really go far beyond what was often called jawboning. We saw hundreds of thousands, millions of tweets and posts being flagged by different government agencies, by a particular department within the Department of Homeland Security. We think some of the most egregious abuses have been really well highlighted and hopefully will be shut down by the Supreme Court. But I think you're absolutely right. We don't really know yet how deep this goes. And I think we have to remember that in the 1970s, it was revealed that the CIA was paying journalists at top news outlets. That was supposed to have stopped, but we don't know if it did. And some of it may have continued, particularly through foreign bureaus. There needs to be what they had in the 1970s, which was a bipartisan church committee hearing to basically get to the bottom of this, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to put an end to the censorship regime once and for all.
Michael, after the Fifth Circuit case that you alluded to, the Biden administration is constrained from directly contacting social media companies in the way the Twitter file revealed and the Facebook files revealed happens with some frequency, or used to happen with some frequency. This move now feels like a pivot to try to affect the same result in terms of the government correcting the record on what they believe is misinformation, but doing so perhaps more directly, or doing so without trying to do this kind of soft influence on social media companies. Even if you disagree with what the government is doing, is this new approach legal, invalid, less coercive, less of a infringement on people's First Amendment rights? Is it simply the government doing its own PSA the way it has historically always been allowed to do, or do you still think it's pernicious?
I think it's potentially very pernicious. I mean, I think you pointed to the big difference here, which is that jawboning is supposed to be something that you're doing publicly, or some awareness of it publicly. I think we all recognize the difference between having the press secretary or even the president say, hey, I disagree with this media coverage. I really don't think this is accurate. That's very different than funneling grants to NGOs to be engaging in demanding censorship. I mean, government funding for NGOs to demand censorship ostensibly by third-party actors, or to be doing it secretly. This is not difficult to resolve, by the way. All you have to do is require that government officials publicly disclose any demands for content moderation or censorship that they're making on social media platforms. You could ban it, but I think there is a case to be made that some amount of communication may be part of this, but it should be immediately publicly known. I mean, this is it's the secrecy that's so often the problem here. It's not the only solution. I personally think the long-term solution is to put content moderation decisions back in the hands of users. This is not hard to do technologically. We should be able to decide the content we see or don't see. It should not be in the hands of big tech. That should be a very easy deal to work out, where in exchange for these really wonderful liability protections that we give to social media platforms in the form of Section 230, then we, the people, should have the right to decide what we're going to see on those social media platforms. That's for legal content, of course, is not including illegal content, which is already policed effectively.
Well, how would that work? I'm sorry, you say this is simple, but I find myself kind of overwhelmed by the prospect. I know many people, myself included, who feel like they've been shadow banned in the past, or still who feel like they've been treated wrongly on the apps who've been validated in that because of some of the information that's come out in the Twitter files. So how do you see, what does it look like to hand over those content moderation decisions to individuals?
I mean, I think it would be really straightforward in the sense that you sign up to Facebook or Twitter, you have a set of, or whatever social media platform, you are able to choose a set of filters from drop-down menus that you can adjust, any day, anytime you want to do it. And you could choose a filter, say, I want Brianna's filter, or I want Michael Shellenberger's filter, or I want the ADL's filter. And you might turn them on or off again, and it would provide a kind of broad algorithm for things that those individuals or those organizations want to see moderated, or you might not have one at all, in which case you're probably going to see a lot of content that you don't want to see. Right now, we have that in a very minimal way, in the sense that we can follow people, we can block people, we can mute people. So what I'm suggesting is we should just expand that. And you have heard, by the way, both Elon Musk, the owner of X, formerly Twitter, and also Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, many people in the industry, I think they're ready to get beyond all the politics. They're under extreme pressure. They want to get back to the business of operating social media platforms. They don't want to be, I think, constantly pulled up in front of Congress, criticized in the media. They would rather see users control this, I believe. And then advertisers, too, would be able to decide how they're going to target, who they're going to target, what kind of individuals would be targeting based on their filters, based on other information that we, the users, would, of course, be in a position to share or not share,
but Michael,
according to particular privacy regulations.
Isn't that a little out of step with what Elon Musk said about wanting to take away the block function? I believe he was ironically blocked from doing so, but that seems to be going in a very different direction.
Well, I think I don't agree with that proposal, and it seemed like there was a strong negative reaction to that idea. I think we absolutely have to be able to block trolls or people harassing us, and you should not have to be exposed to information you don't want to be exposed to. I mean, that's our right to be able to protect ourselves in those ways. But I don't think it's our right then to go and censor information for your neighbor or for other people. I mean, this solution, I think, is so simple. It's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it, because it's not technologically difficult. There's sort of a case you could make that, well, the social media platforms want to be able to control the content for different users because it's a way to be able to keep people hooked on the website. I'm not so sure even that's true, because if you can have greater control, I think you are participating in determining how to make the content that you're receiving more pleasant, more or more disagreeable. I mean, you may want to get different voices. I mean, I'm constantly changing who I follow, who I don't follow, based on what I'm interested in or reporting on in that moment. I think most users would like to have that level of control, and it's just absurd that we're allowing big tech, and then certainly and increasingly now big government, to be using all these means and mechanisms to be able to increase censorship and demand censorship of disfavored views. We can resolve this all very simply by just returning to user-controlled content moderation.
Michael, before we let you go, you said something that was interesting. You said you think we should return moderation back to the users. Now, we've talked about what government should do. We've talked about what some of these large tech companies should do. But for our viewers who are going to watch this episode who don't trust government, they don't trust Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, maybe they don't even trust X, but maybe to a certain extent, what can they do today, right now, to protect their privacy, to make sure that the government isn't targeting them because of their political beliefs? Is there any advice you would give to the viewers on these are some steps you can take to sort of preserve your privacy and your free speech?
Well, I think it's very difficult. I mean, certainly there are a number of settings on all the different social media platforms that are supposed to protect you, but we've also seen the social media platforms repeatedly violate those privacy protections. I mean, it's interesting because I've been very critical of efforts by Europe to expand a censorship regime. They have much less respect for censorship. I mean, much less respect for free speech than we do in the United States. On the other hand, they've actually gone further than we have in trying to protect the privacy of their users. So I do think there's actually a kind of possibly a good marriage of these two different proposals. A big emphasis on privacy in Europe, a big emphasis on free speech in the United States. By the way, those privacy regulations appear to be headed to the European High Court, while our free speech debate is headed to the Supreme Court. So I do think, look, we're really on a knife's edge here. It could go either way towards a much more totalitarian regime worldwide in terms of censorship and free speech and privacy, or towards greater openness. And so I think that this is why I've been making an alliance with our friends in Europe, because I do think marrying these two things, greater protections of privacy and greater control over our own user content so that we don't have to be censored either by big tech or big government or unaccountable NGOs, that's the right solution going forward. Let's get the internet back to what the original promise was, which was to expand our freedoms and options while protecting our privacy. All of that is technologically in reach. There's nothing in the way of achieving that reality. It's just interest groups and power plays and power dynamics. But I think if you put it to the people, we know what we want. We want open and free platforms and greater privacy.
Michael Shellenberger, thanks as always for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Brianna.